Okay,
So Mike, oh, go ahead, Blake.
no, are you, you want to take over here, Lisa? What's your pleasure?
I'll let you get it started. I was just gonna ask Mike, I've never once ever in my whole entire life shared my screen, but
Okay.
I'd like to attempt that this evening if we can.
I will make sure that you have that right now. It's available to you.
Okay.
So the way to do it, Lisa, is you need to have whatever you want to share up on your desktop.
Yeah.
And then when you hit share screen, a window will pop up and allow you to select whatever it is that you want to share. Okay.
All right, Lemon.
Want to practice?
All right. So
Try
let's
share screen. Go ahead.
Is it sharing?
No.
You just see me still?
Yes.
All right, hold on. Thank you for your patience, all. Oh, Lord in heaven.
So do you see a green button at the bottom that says share screen?
Yeah, I pressed that and then it says Safari unknown.
Okay, so do you have your, what is it that you want to share? Do you have that already opened?
Yeah, it's a Google Slides.
Okay, so do you see when you hit share screen, do you see Google Slides as one of the, that would probably be in Safari, right?
I guess so, yeah.
So hit share screen and then click on Google Slides. Let's see what happens. Everyone duck. Just click right on the icon there.
Well, now it's bringing up security and privacy. I thought this would be much easier.
Yeah, so tell me when you click on share screen, what do you see?
When I click on share screen, it says, now it says system preferences, Safari unknown, preview.
Click on preview maybe.
And then when I click that, it says I have to open system preferences to grant access.
Okay. Do you want to send me your presentation and I'll be your
Sure.
Vanna White.
Why don't we do that?
Okay.
Blake, I've made you a co-host. I'm just going to run grab some water, please.
Okay. Yep, gotcha. Okay. Are you sending it to my town email?
Well, we're going to see which one shows up in my.
Okay, that's cool.
Well, neither one of them are showing up in Google. So why don't we, is it L Blake Baldwin or
Yep,
B
that's
Baldwin?
me. Yep.
Blake, no.
Or B Baldwin, that's my town address.
Let's do that one.
All right.
Thank you for your patience, everyone.
Let's see who we have visiting us now. We have 9 members of the public with us, so that's good. And you just sent that to me?
I did.
All right, give me a sec. Hasn't shown up yet, but I'm sure it will. So do you need this to get started, or can we start the meeting and when I get it, I will share?
I guess I don't need it.
Or what were you going to show us? Do you have PowerPoint?
It's the Google slideshow PowerPoint. Yep.
Okay.
And so, hold on, give me one second.
Give me 1 second. Still hasn't shown up. Well, while we're waiting for the marvelous technology to kick in here, I would like to welcome everybody to a select board workshop. It is Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021, and we have a quorum present, including Sally with her dog Bear, Courtney Neto, Bill Ward, Lisa Pratt, Frank Paul. Shiloh has had a snack at least and is now no longer hangry. And
I'm a little better off. Yep.
that's true. And yours truly, Blake Baldwin. Mike will be with us in a moment. This is a workshop on committees, and we put this in the able hands of Lisa Pratt, who's going to lead us through a conversation. And I'm looking for, there we go. All right. Oh boy.
What's oh boy mean?
Well, it came through as a link, so let's see what happens when all right, so.
I saw something from IT about that. You're only supposed to follow them if you know the source for sure.
That's true. All right, now I gotta go two-step verification. I gotta go to my phone. There we go. All right.
This is what I get for trying to be high tech.
6-2. Okay, you have to grant me access, so. Oh, boy.
So what does that entail?
I
Oh
don't
my
know.
God.
So you've been sent a request from wherever you sent the document. And when you reply that I'm allowed to see this, then I will be able to share. And apologies to everyone for the
Yes.
slight delay here, but we will.
All right. It says I've shared this file with you.
Okay, so let's refresh. And there we go. And I've got him. So where's slideshow on this?
For Google Slides,
Yeah.
if you go up to present at the top there. Yep. There you go. All right. Can everyone hear me?
I don't see present, but add-ons, tools. Anyway, well, here we go. Look,
There you go.
so there we go.
So see at the top next to share, it says present on the right, all the way at the top.
All the way at the top, it says file, edit, view, insert
Keep
format.
going to the right. Keep going to your right.
There's nothing more over there.
Yeah, no, that's left, all the way to the right. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, yeah.
Says present.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay. Ta-da.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
All right. So obviously Blake introduced us. We are here for the Town of Kennebunk workshop on committees. You can go to the next slide.
By the
Don't
way, Lisa, I should just interject that this meeting is being recorded for
Yes.
later presentation to the public. Back to you, Lisa.
Yep. Don't forget, you're all excused to go vote if you need to. It's election day. All right, next slide. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for participating in this discussion. I wanted to thank everyone who I spoke to. I spoke to members of committees, the public. I spoke to other town committees, and I wanted to thank Kathy Nolette. She spent hours with me going over the history of committees and her opinions as a staff member, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to do a shout out. You can do next slide. So this is a little quote from Helen Keller to get us in the mood. But we are here to discuss the role of committees in the town of Kennebunk. As you all know, my interest is stemmed from creating more accessibility and engagement from the public. And so I have spent many hours on this. And let's see. I've consulted other towns. I've spoken with committee members in Kennebunk, and I've changed my mind 1,000 times back and forth on what I think the role of committee members is. I am happy to share what I learned from other towns at the end, but right now I want to just give you the facts. And hopefully all these facts can help you guys decide as we move forward on what the role of committees are. I would like to also recognize that I'm aware there have been many past discussions about this, and I just want to move forward with the assumption that there is some frustration with some members. Not everybody's frustrated, not all committee members are frustrated, not all select board members are frustrated, and not all town staff members are frustrated, but there is some, and I want there to be none. And so that's why we are doing this. And then, now that we're in this screen, I've got to see if I can find my information. Sorry, I just wanted to read something to everyone, but the screen is different. So
You want the next slide?
no, you can stay on that slide for now. Sorry. So like I said, I did a lot of investigating on what committees are and need and have. And one thing that I found is, sorry, here we go. It's from the Center for Association Leadership. And I'm just going to read this, and hopefully it kind of puts us all in the right mind frame. Just as every board is unique, every board's committee structure is unique too. Most boards continue the same committee structure from year to year with little thought given to as what the committees do or whether they are still relevant. As a result, the committees have vague objectives. Committee meetings are often endless discussions with no results achieved, and the members of the committees become bored or frustrated. If the committee structure has not been revisited in a few years, the board should consider looking at the current committee structure and what the committees actually do. If there are overlapping responsibilities or no work being done, then it's time to realign the committee structure. Committees with no work can be abolished, and committees with overlapping work can be merged. Committees should not take on a life of their own, nor should they overshadow the board itself. So initially I had proposed an ad hoc committee on committees, but I think that after reading that really spoke to me. And I think that the select board needs to take some action on what we want from committees. So I'm going to give you a little background. Next slide, please. So these are just a couple definitions. I will let you all just read, and we can, and I'll just talk about it a little bit, but it's just so we're all on the same page. When we talk about Kennebunk and we talk about the charter, all of these words are in our charter. But essentially a committee is, oh, and these come from the Oxford Dictionary. A group of people, a committee is a group of people who are chosen usually by a larger group to make decisions or deal with a particular subject. I think the key about committees is that they're defined by bylaws, charters, or other formal documents. A commission is a group of people officially charged with a particular function. I think the key when we discuss commissions is that they are, and Blake can clarify for me, but they work on their own. Even though they still follow bylaws and charters and have a task, they do not have, they don't have to answer to anybody, essentially. Next slide, please. I think we missed one.
All right.
Oh, yeah, that's it. So a task force is also like a committee. It's a group of people who are brought together to deal with a particular problem. And I think the key with task force is that the group will disband when the objective has been completed. And finally, or no, I guess not finally, a board is a group of people who have power to make decisions and control a company or other organization. Boards are generally elected, and even if you're appointed, you still have to be approved by a vote. A work group is a group of people who work together. So hopefully you're all not confused, but definitely lots of different terms to keep track of. Next slide, please. So this deals with the town of Kennebunk and the select board and what our roles are defined by the select board, or sorry, by the charter. So in section 3.6, it says selectmen shall have the power and duties to appoint members and have control over the following boards and commissions. And Blake and I have discussed this, and I've talked to other people about it. The key term there is highlighted, that it's control over. Next slide. So these are the boards and commissions mentioned in the charter. The stars are the binding committees, which are essentially committees required by law. So we as a select board or the town have no say over them. Also, the site plan review board and the zoning board of appeals are mentioned in the charter. So to eliminate them or alter them, I think would require a charter revision.
So is the budget board, by the way.
Oh, I don't have the budget. Oh, I have the budget board. Isn't that a binding committee?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's mentioned in the charter, that's all I'm saying.
Oh, right. Well, these are all in the charter. This is
Yep.
what it says. So next slide, please. This is another key point about the power of the select board, and this is to create and appoint members to boards and commissions as statutes, ordinances, or town vote may require, or as the Board of Selectmen in its discretion may deem necessary. I won't continue, but essentially we are allowed to create boards and commissions, but as you can clearly see, it does not talk about committees. Also, it is not mentioned what happens when a board, commission, or committee, or task force, etc., is done with their duties and how we move forward. All right, next. And so I stole this from a previous discussion that the select board has had. I'm sure Blake recognizes this, but these are other committees that are mentioned in the charter. There apparently is a harbor committee. There is a vague town committee, an unnamed committee. And so these are other things that obviously something needs to be addressed in the charter. And then I don't know if bylaws is the correct term, but the other two committees that are required by other entities other than the select board are the Community Development Advisory Committee, which is brand new. We just discussed it a couple months ago in the select board meeting. And then the Waterhouse Center Advisory Committee. And that is part of the conditions of the grant that was given to us to create the Waterhouse Center. So long story short, at this point, I don't think we need to discuss the binding committees or any committees mentioned in the town charter, or these two committees that we are required to have. The other committee I don't really want to discuss is the Bicentennial Committee, since it is going to be sunsetted in December, since we have moved past our bicentennial celebrations. Next. Nope, you missed one. Yep, there we go. So those are our current committees and commissions that we're looking at. If we take all those other ones out of it, whittles it down nicely. And I think that an important aside is that the Committee on Aging has had a few people resign recently. And I think their frustration and their resignations are indicative of the problem that we need to address. Next. So we have two committees that are somewhat unique. I've spoken to Kathy and Mike about this. We have the Dog Advisory Committee, but they work very close with the Kennebunk Police Department and our Animal Control Officer. And it's been suggested that we change them to a work group that works under the police department. The select board doesn't have much control over them or input. Another one is the Treasure Chest Monitoring Committee. They work closely with the Public Services Director. And I should also note that both committees are seasonal. They only are around during the fair weather months. So I think that it is something that should be on a future agenda for us to discuss the status of those two committees as we move forward. Next. We have two inactive committees. And as you can read here, there are currently 6 vacancies on the Parks and Rec Committee. They tried to meet in 2019 and did not have a quorum. And they had 4 members meet in 2018. The Affordable Housing Committee last met essentially in 2017. So we do have some current people that are involved in the Parks and Rec Committee, but right now we do not have anyone on the Affordable Housing Committee. And in my opinion, I think that we need to just sunset these committees and move forward. People know that I have a general interest in the Parks and Rec Committee, but I think that we need to see if people are interested in that committee and have them move forward with wanting to create the committee and with a new purpose statement. Next. So this is what it all boils down to. What makes an effective committee? So hopefully I won't bore you all. I found this very interesting. And this comes from the American Library Association, which is sort of an unusual reference, but I think it's pretty concise and to the point. So I'll just go through it pretty quickly. And I think there's 5 points to what makes an effective committee. Written committee description. There should be a written description of what is expected of each committee to guide the chair and members. The description should summarize the purpose of the committee, its composition, the selection procedure, and the specific duties of the committee. 2, an effective chair. You need to look at 2 things: content knowledge and experience relevant to the work of the committee, as well as proven leadership and people skills that will be essential if the group is to work effectively. Next slide. And I just wanted to point out that in the agenda, Kathy Nolet and I worked on a document on committees, and under each committee, it does state their current purpose. Some are very vague and some are not. So the 3rd point is members are thoughtfully appointed. They should be recruited with the following question in mind: what tasks are the committee responsible for, and who among our members possess the skills and experience needed to complete those tasks? As is the case with other forms of volunteer recruitment, every effort should be made to match the needs and requirements of the committee and the skills, knowledge, and interests of prospective committee members. I think right now Blake does a great, or sorry, not Blake, Mike does a great job of interviewing prospective members and vetting them for us. So I think that we are at an advantage at this point with that. Next slide. Number 4, accountability to the board. This begins with the written committee function that describes what the board expects from the committee. There should also be an effort to link the committee description with relevant strategic plan language. So I think that this might be something we're going to discuss in future select board meetings, but moving forward with our strategic plan and having committees that are on board with our strategic plan and moving the town forward is very important. And then 5 is having well-run meetings. And that's, I think, sort of a summary of all the other 4 points. All right, next one.
Whoop.
Yep, there you go. So they also had some additional suggestions and that I thought were very relevant and spoke to me. And so one is to provide an orientation for new committee members. I have been a committee member and did not receive an orientation and definitely found myself floundering for quite some time. And I think that part of a new committee member's orientation should be their introduction to the committee handbook, which is also linked on the agenda. And I think is really important for people to look at and see. It's a very well-written document that I believe Mike and Karen created. The next suggestion is to make sure that committee members receive an agenda in advance of meetings and have all the information they need to complete their work. I think Kennebunk does a great job with this right now, and we should keep it up. Next is to provide regular and appropriate recognition to active committee members. I think this is really important, and this is one thing that a few people spoke to me about. In the past, there has been excellent recognition of the work that committee members have done. And my understanding is that with COVID, some of that recognition has fallen to the wayside, and people are sort of feeling unloved, for lack of a better word. And so I think it's important for the select board and the town to recognize the work that these committee members do for us. And then finally, I don't know why my bullet point didn't show up, but, and I think this is important, that the chair should seek out unproductive committee members to find out what is getting in the way of performance and then devising strategies to overcome those barriers. I think that just because you're appointed to a committee doesn't mean you can just hang in there and get all the glory. You still have to put some work into it, and we need to keep track of that. Next slide. So this is why we're all here tonight. So what is the role of a committee in Kennebunk? In my opinion and in my research, we have 3 choices. Committees: 1, complete tasks assigned by staff members. That's pretty straightforward. 2, to quote June, committees are the heart of the town. They're visionaries that look outside the box of official town business and see innovative projects that benefit the community. Or 3, it's a compromise of the 2. Committees work with town staff to help necessary projects, but also have visions of projects that can help move the town forward with the assistance of that staff. Committees supplement the work of the board and staff. They bring fresh ideas, approaches, and resources to the organization. So I will share here that my belief is that it's a compromise. I think that some research and some discussions have been done in the past about committees in Kennebunk. And unfortunately, right now, I believe the weak link is the connection between committees and the staff members. And so how do we move forward and create that link and make it more effective? How do we improve? I think that the role between the select board and the committees has improved in creating the liaison position. And I also believe that the reports that we're doing on the agenda that we have been reporting on our committees meetings at every meeting is really important and has definitely created some validity for the committees in our community. Next slide. So here we go, moving forwards. And I think that when we move forward, we need to consider all committees, commissions, and boards. But obviously, as I said at the beginning, there's nothing that we can do about a certain number of them. But I think moving forward, just like I was discussing about effective committees, each committee needs to create a purpose statement. Some have not. And I think that that's really important. I think for people who want to be engaged in that committee, if they look it up and look at the website and there's no purpose statement, they don't know what that committee is about. I think it also allows the select board and town staff to keep an eye on that committee and make sure they're following that purpose. Also, I think the select board under the current charter needs to discuss the role of each committee in town. We need to vote on that role and move forward with educating committees on their role. And we need to utilize the committee handbook. And that also, I think, goes back to that first piece that I read, that we as a select board, in my opinion, need to decide and look at each committee and decide what its role is, if it's still effective, and if it is following our strategic plan and how we want to move our town forward. The third thing is, moving forward, I think we need to evaluate the committee model for each group. Maybe some committees are better as task forces or work groups or volunteer projects. I think that maybe initially a committee had a greater purpose, and now maybe it can just work on a few tasks. Maybe it needs to be sunsetted. Maybe it just becomes a group of volunteers that help work on certain things. But I think that opening things up and not working under the committee structure so strictly could be an advantage to us. Another thing that I think we need to do moving forward is look at term limits. While I know we're struggling to get people to volunteer on the committees, sometimes I think, I look to the founding fathers, and, the intention was not for career politicians to be part of our government. And I look at the committees like that as well. Next slide. So, oh, I think you missed one again. There we go.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really important one that I think the select board needs to address in a select board meeting, that the select board in conjunction with the town manager needs to discuss whether or not the current model stated in the town charter is effective for Kennebunk. Should the select board remain in control? Should the town manager be in control? Since he or she has in-depth knowledge of current and future projects, has resources, can be a liaison with staff to improve communication, already interviews prospective members before coming before the select board, etc. I believe the select board needs to vote and revise the charter, maybe a possible charter revision in the June election. And that could also provide a decision for the Charter Commission, if that were to happen in the future, how we want, who we want, I guess, to be in control of committees. If you can't guess, I think that my opinion is that I believe the town manager is a person who is in better position to help guide committees. And I think the select board should remain in a liaison position, consulting, but not being the main, what's the word I'm looking for? Contact point. Next slide. So if the control were to change hands, then I think moving forward, we need to decide what the best relationship of the board, select board, is to the committees. We need to evaluate the roles of the liaisons, and those sort of go together, staff and select board, to better communicate and move projects forward efficiently. And I would love to have a team building event. This is my great desire, to increase trust between staff, committee members, and select board liaisons. Something that will open up the doors of communication. I used to work with team building many moons ago, and it really is an effective tool. I know with COVID it's difficult, and I'm not sure if there's a Zoom team building thing we can do out there, but I think that this is really important. And somebody in the community that I spoke to suggested a bowling league. People get together. I'm not sure if that's the right mechanism, but doing something to create, increase communication and trust to build that team, I think is really important as we move forward. And then also, I think that we need to think about a charter commission and see if the charter commission wants to reevaluate committees. Next.
Trying.
Now you skipped over it again. You ruined it with my quote.
No, I didn't. I
Oh.
did.
You're right. Sorry. Well, anyway, there's my great quote from Robert Paris Morris, who was a civil rights leader who obviously believed in the leadership abilities of his community, and I do as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that leadership is there in the people if we want to give it to them. And then next is discussion. So I can, at this point, share what I've learned about other towns in other states and other parts of Maine, but I wanted to make sure that this discussion was our own as far as a select board and didn't want to bias anybody with what other towns are doing.
Okay. Do you want to lead the discussion, or how do you want to proceed, Lisa?
Well, Bill's got his hand up, so should we
Here you
just
go. Let's
go with
talk.
that?
Okay, I guess I'll kick it off. Lisa, I first want to say you've done an excellent job, and I'm glad you came to a lot of conclusions that are good.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, excellent work. A lot of fun work went into that, I can tell. I would love to hear more about what some of the other towns are doing. I mean, I find sometimes it's better not to reinvent the wheel, but to listen to what others who have invented things will do. Although we have to remind ourselves that the other towns you may be hearing about may have uniquely different charters and uniquely different scenarios. Regarding Mike, regarding your question, and I'll just toss it out there. You know, I've come to, originally I was kind of on the fence, and then I've kind of gone back and forth on this, but the idea of Mike overseeing and managing committees, I think, is a good idea. I think originally committees come out of our own creation. We see a problem or we see an issue or people bring enough or bring things to us that tell us that maybe this needs to be studied. Then we should filter and decide whether we need the work group, the task force, or the committee, and then we create the committee. As for the management of that committee, I completely agree that Mike is better. I think that will help in terms of, Mike has said it in other meetings that we've been in, that Mike is the traffic coordinator. And I think in terms of that, he can manage the work that can be done with the talents that he has on the committee and work and kind of pivot that around with what talents the staff has, rather than have camp run amok where people are just running in and out of, you know, different staff members' offices and this sort of thing. Everything just kind of flows through Mike, so Mike can kind of manage the workflow. And I think that kind of a structure, and I hate to use the word structure because I can tell there'll be people in the audience who immediately, once I say structure, their hair will go on fire. But we've heard that before in other years when we brought this up. But I think the idea is, to me, has always been that we try to create a committee that's got a purpose. Within the confines of that purpose, a certain amount of creativity from within the committee is certainly good. But you don't want a committee that's based on a committee on aging suddenly inventing a new go-kart. I mean, you know, sometimes what happens in the committee structure, I know that's a rather extreme thing that we've run into in the past, is that their ideas are good. I mean, they're thinking in the heads of the town, but they get adrift a little bit. I think that's where the chairman, part of the leadership of the chair should be, is trying to stay focused, trying to keep the committee focused. Now, within the confines of that, creativity is certainly one of the strengths of a committee. But so there's that. These are just some ideas I have. I'll let others jump in.
No, I couldn't have said it better, Bill. I think that that's really important. I think Mike isn't important, and I don't want to give Mike more tasks, or the town manager, whoever it may be. But I think that that's an important point person. And when you talk about the triangle of communication, I think, the town manager's on the top. He or she knows the details or what's needed or what's coming down the pike that we might not know about. And there might be a project that we would think, oh, this would be great. We'll use composting as an example, and I'm just making up a hypothetical here, but maybe Mike knows what's coming down the pike with composting, but we have a committee that wants to evaluate composting in town, and it should be communication between him and that committee, and he can say, actually, I already have that covered, or I could use your help with this aspect of it. and he knows, instead of having the select board, that liaison who then has to go talk to Mike and then go back to the committee. I think it would just create more effective communication.
It's
And
ironic you mentioned that, Lisa, only because there is an completely unofficial committee. They were part of, there was a group of women with the dog advisory committee. They wanted, and they got a hold of a guy from the state of Maine to come down, and one of the dog advisory meetings was talking about composting dog waste. There are a lot of issues with that. In either case, the long and the short of it is, she worked with Mike, and Mike shepherded the process through, and they actually got a grant to do certain things. And I think that's led to what you may have heard of about having some facilities down at the town barn to handle that composting.
Mhm.
So it worked out well. All right, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump.
Oh, no. And I think that's important because there are committees and workforces, task forces that have been great and done great work. And I think that that's really important to recognize. And I think the other key thing that you say is that by creating a compromise and allowing there to be creativity as well as task oriented, really creates some positive outcomes for everybody.
I want people to feel that they have achieved something. I think part of the reason why people get upset with committees, and some of what I'm hearing, they're not saying the words, but they don't feel that they're achieving anything. And then that kind of lowers their feeling of self-worth in terms of their committee perspective.
Right. I think that's exactly it. And by having a direct point person that can guide them more directly with better communication, that definitely needs to be worked on. I think that that's really important. Shiloh?
Thanks, Lisa. Really appreciate you organizing this and thinking through and clearly stating pretty much all of the things that we've kind of touched on or talked about over the years, and then some that we maybe haven't, but should be thinking about. So this is a lot of good work in a relatively short amount of time. I like the direction this is heading. I did want to say, just take a pause though, because there are quite a few things that I think you either alluded to or made a specific comment on, and we should come back to. And I think I'm going to be right on board with you on all of these things. But this big is a fairly significant one in terms of workload and time of a shift. And maybe Mike will say it's not really, because he's kind of been playing this role anyway by default. But I would like to hear, I'm sure that you wouldn't have brought this forward without talking to Mike extensively about it, but I kind of would like to hear the feasibility of this approach from Mike as to how this would play out from within his day-to-day role as town manager, and what his thoughts are on that before we go forward.
No, I think that's good. Mike, if you want to speak now.
Lisa, I really appreciate the work that you put into this and how succinctly you summarized, again, things that have been discussed for a number of years. I do believe in the role that I serve and those that will follow me, that we really do direct traffic, recognizing that the staff has a number of projects, recognizing the wonderful committee, commission, and board members that we have, but focusing on committees. I think that our committee members are so well intended and they have so much talent, and that we sometimes fail to draw upon that talent, and we end up in points of conflict because they may have wonderful ideas, but we lack communication between staff and our committee members. And if we were to collaborate on those initiatives and identify within one or two initiatives that we agree upon within each committee, going back to what Bill said, I believe there would be a clear sense of accomplishment. When there are a number of ideas that come from a committee and staff is overloaded and can't participate in working in concert, then we fail. And we fail not as a committee, not as staff, but we fail together. And so I think it's really imperative, and I'm happy to go forward with the idea where I can kind of cross-pollinate with committees and staff and the board members that serve as the liaisons to the respective committees, where I think we can come up with your purpose statement for each one, identified avenues for goals and objectives, and then work together. And I think that that would enhance the communication, and it would disperse the workload where committee members can really assist staff and staff can assist committee members toward achievement. So it's a long-winded answer, but I think that the relationship that we're talking about developing will only grow towards success.
Thank you, Mike. I think your long-winded answer was a good answer. So
Thank you.
I appreciate that. I don't know if that answers Shiloh's question, but
Shiloh, ask me again if I missed it.
No, that's fine. I just basically wanted to know that we're like, hey, you know what we should do? We should give this to Mike. And if you're like, already at 130% and this is something that would be too difficult to take on, then that's what I wanted to hear, was whether that's
Yeah.
something that's
No,
feasible, that's part of what
I
you're doing.
appreciate that. I think one of the things that I'm always in it, and people know I'm protective of staff workload, so that I make sure that they're not overloaded in dealing with burnout, and that we move toward success. So as those ideas and things come toward me, if I can effectively help to disperse those appropriately toward the success, I'm happy to do that, and as part of my job, and would do that.
I've got a couple more things I wanted to ask. I'm going to step back and raise my hand again in a bit.
all right. Well then, Courtney.
Yeah, I think along the lines of what Shiloh's mentioning, obviously, a big topic of conversation every meeting is staff being overloaded and, straight out. And I think that, like what we've talked about, Lisa, which is kind of how we got here, is how as committees can we be more effective? So to me, I think a big thing is like, Mike, you being able to delegate what you feel comfortable and confident, not giving up control, but kind of giving up control on certain things, and in your position, you're very organized and obviously involved in pretty much everything that you are part of, if that makes sense. Your name's just not on it, you're part of it. So I think that, when you are delegating, I think that would be one thing, is coming to conclusions of things that would what's going to make you feel the most confident and comfortable actually delegating to committees. And, what is it that someone would have to come to you from a committee with, any committee, to make you feel, confident to tell that committee they can move forward with whatever it might be. So, for instance, like if there's certain things going on in town, like you said, with the composting, I think a huge step of being proactive instead of reactive is, if you're in control, obviously you'd pull in the relevant committees right away so that they're not sitting over here like, okay, who can we research to compost for us? And then they come and bring it to you and you're like, oh, guys, this is already happening.
Right.
How can we pull together those connections right away? But yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like a really good idea. And Lisa, you did an amazing job. Everything was very well laid out and organized and very easy to understand. So thank you.
Courtney, may I, if I may, Lisa, just chime in on, I am very, very comfortable with delegating to the folks that have the skills, knowledge, and abilities, and that includes staff, committee members, all of that, because that's how we are an effective team. And so it's more of just having a general sense of awareness and managing that traffic that we talked about. So ultimately being able to report back to you folks and our citizens about the achievements, and letting committees know that they are well supported and respected. That's really important.
Yes, thank you.
Sally. Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me now? Sorry. Yeah.
Yes,
got all
now we
grouped up.
can.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm the only one that's probably in disagreement with that. I think that from my perspective with the committees, that it's really important for as a select board to really define our role as what a liaison is. If we go into the committee charter, it's very vague and we don't have to attend and what do we do? But I think if our role is a little bit more well-defined and purposeful, I think having just the one person, this is nothing against Mike or anything, but just the one person at the top overseeing some of the committees, I think that that we have potential for a lot of frustration and one of the things that I've heard a lot since I've started is that, you know, we don't want to overload the staff, and we definitely don't. But I think at some point, if that's always an issue, you know, maybe we need to hire more staff or, you know, do something so that, you know, we can go forward with some of the plans of committees without always having that answer. But anyways, I guess I think that all the work that you did, Lisa, was great, but I think that just having one person, whether no matter who it would be, overseeing is may not be the best answer.
I totally understand where you're coming from, Sally. And like I alluded to at the beginning, like I've gone back and forth 1,000 times on what I think is best and most appropriate. And I think, unfortunately, in my opinion, in this current structure with a select board and a town manager and committees, that unfortunately, you know, we're playing a game of telephone by trying to, you know, go through different people. And that I think it's really best for committees to move forward and be effective. And that's, you know, the key word that I really want to hone in on is being effective, is that having that one point person who has the knowledge. And I totally understand what you're saying, that that's giving that one person, that one position, more control and more power. But I think that that's where then we, and I mentioned that in the presentation, that as we move forward and if control were to change hands, where does the select board fit into that? And I think that we really need to create stronger liaison positions where we're still listening to the constituents and still participating. And we as liaisons still communicate with Mike, or I should say the town manager, but we maintain that triangular relationship, but still having that point person, I think, is really important. But I think as liaisons, we really need to step up and be going like you are to every committee meeting and participating.
But there's no purpose for me to be going if I really have no purpose there. Why would I want to spend my evening? I mean, I go now because I have a responsibility and I am the communication. But if that's taken away, I mean, if I don't have that, I mean, I do have better things to do in my evenings. I mean, it just, you know what I'm saying?
Well, it's not
like
being
devalues what our purpose is.
I don't
And
think
I
it's
think-
being taken away from you. I think it's being more important because now you're reporting directly to the town manager what is being said at those committee meetings, because we can't expect the town manager to go to every meeting.
So then I would go to the historic committee and then I would go to Mike.
I think the historic commission is sort of not a
like-
great example, only because their purpose is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I think it kind of twists things around. I guess I just don't,
But if you take a committee
yeah.
like the Energy Efficiency Committee, and they decide we want to change all the lighting to LED lighting, and they have their meeting and that's something they want to propose, then you as the select board liaison can communicate with Mike and say, this is what they want to do. Is this feasible? And Mike will know the town's already working on that, or we don't have the resources for that, or that's not possible because there's no such thing as LED lighting, you know, whatever it might be. But I think that that really makes a stronger bond as the liaison for a committee like that. We can't talk about some of those binding committees whose purpose is already pretty clear. Does that make sense?
No, well, it does, but I still don't agree with that. I think it changes the structure of who's overseeing what. And I guess I just don't think that that's the direction that we should be going in.
Could I throw in a quick comment about the board liaisons from how, again, this doesn't have to at all have to be how they're going forward, but the board liaison position has never been a control or in charge kind of position for any committee. The goal of the intent of a liaison has always been, and again, we can redefine that, I think, but has been to listen primarily at a meeting and bring back information to the board, to this board, on what the committee is doing, a summary of what the committee is doing, and what their sort of bigger picture goals are. It very much wasn't ever a situation where, and to provide advice and commentary from what you're acting on behalf of the board in a way, but you're not speaking for the board. You're not saying this is what the board thinks about X, Y, and Z. You're there, and if they have questions about, like, if we want to bring this before the board, how would we do this? If we want to, we need to change an ordinance. Oh, this is how you to provide information about process to a committee that may or may not have that information, and really to keep the board appraised of what's happening on those committees. And so, because there are so many committees, I mean, if you really did have to go to every committee meeting, I mean, I can't do it all the time. It just simply isn't possible to go to those. So in the cases where you can't go to the to every committee meeting, then at least speaking with a committee chair, reviewing their minutes, making sure you're up to speed on what's going on. That's always how it's been, is to be at least aware and be a resource to that committee from the board, and to keep the board apprised of what's going on. So just to improve communication, as it's supposed to be. And I think Lisa's emphasis on making sure that those reports come, on every meeting and more effectively is a great one. I think that's a good change, because it's really just emphasizing what we're supposed to be doing already.
Right.
In this restructuring, I also want to be sure, like to Sally's point though, that if the point person for committees is going to be Mike, and to some extent it sounds like that's the crux is not even that. It's not even managing like what resources are available when, which is really important. I think that's key as to what Mike could be doing most effectively. But at the next level is setting those priorities for the committees, and what do we want committees to be doing? What priorities do we have in this town that we need to be accomplishing, that we should be accomplishing now, and kind of in which order? To a large extent, that is still our responsibility, working with Mike on that. And then Mike says, okay, we have resources in the staff, and we have resources on these committees, and we have external resources, or maybe we need to bring in some. And those are the kind of things he can do. But I still think that as a board, we need to be aware of what a committee is doing, what their goals are, what progress they're making, and discuss that among ourselves. So I don't see that position changing in a fundamental way. I also want to be careful that it wouldn't be a matter of like, okay, the committee wants to do this, the liaison goes and talks to Mike, sets those priorities, goes back to the committee and says here's what's going on. That in some sense would undermine the role of the committee chair. So we have to be careful not to do that. So the committee chair should be talking with Mike if we did move to this role, and setting those priorities with their committee, and having that back and forth. And in my view, my role would still be to be there primarily as to listen and report back and be a resource. And then if I say, okay, I really think this is going in the wrong direction, then maybe it's time to revisit at a board level, the priority that we have for that committee or for that aspect of our town, even at a higher level.
Mm-hmm.
And then not so much in the operational day to day. I wouldn't be necessarily going to Mike and saying, okay, I need to set the priorities for the Conservation Commission. But I would want to be aware of what they're doing and what those priorities are, and be thinking about, does that fit with bigger picture with the design of the town?
No, I think you make a good point, and I think that that's probably something, going back to what I was saying, moving forward, defining the liaison role, and maybe by changing this dynamic, we take that staff liaison role out of there as a direct contact, and maybe that takes some pressure off them. I'm kind of speaking off the cuff right now, but maybe that takes some pressure off of the staff liaison and puts more pressure on the, I shouldn't say pressure, but more responsibility on the select board liaison to make sure they're an effective communicator with Mike and with the committee and with their chair.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to depend on the committee and their specific things, whether they need to be working directly with, Karen or Chris or some other member of the staff, or whether it's something more about like, policy decisions.
Right.
But I also did agree with Sally's other point, was that if there's a bunch of really important initiatives that our committees are trying to accomplish, but they can never get access to staff, or they don't get enough, or they can't accomplish the mission, then that's when we need to decide, is this mission important enough that we either need to divert staff resources to this one, or we need more staff. And if the mission is important enough and we simply don't have enough staff, then that's when we would go and say we need to do more, or setting a priority. Instead of a 2-year goal, this is a 5-year goal, or instead of a 6-month goal, this is a 1-year goal. and drawing it out over time so those things can be accomplished. And I think that's more of an organizational thing. And that is, I think, where Sally, though I completely agree with you on this idea that like we can't be sitting there going, every committee is getting the same. You know, a lot of committees are feeling like they're getting don't have resources, they don't have the access that they need, the resources they need. Maybe it's not a lot, maybe it's a couple, but then one solution is not do the things, and one solution is get more resources and more people. And we have to figure out what we can actually accomplish.
Yeah, I agree with that, Shiloh. And I missed that part when you spoke to that, Sally. I totally agree that yes, there is a certain tipping point where if we're not moving forward with initiatives that committees, which essentially are community members, find important, then we need to look at our staffing and see if there's something that needs to change with that. Because I think that looking at our constituents and our community members and what's important to them is the whole point of committees. And that's what's, I think, most important. And that goes all back to that engagement that I'm looking for. Courtney.
Yeah, Sally, I completely agree with you too. And I don't want you to feel at all that you're alone in your thoughts. For me, I don't look at, putting Mike as the person overseeing the committees as being in full control of them. So like what Shiloh and Lisa were just speaking of, if things weren't being accomplished or committees were bringing ideas forward and they weren't being able to amicably work with town hall, then that would be an absolute no-go in my mind. But there are so many things that are counterproductive right now that I've noticed where, Mike maybe had things in the works that I had no idea about, but then here we are on economic development talking about all these things that are going to take so much effort and energy to organize, when really maybe Mike had something that really aligned. But if Mike and I would have had a discussion, I would have known. So, when we first started talking about this meeting and this workshop, for me, it was speaking with you, Lisa, and you, Sally, about what do we do when we go to these meetings? Like, what's our goal? And I think for me, regardless of if it's Mike overseeing committees or us, we're always going to have that agenda item on the meetings, or at least we should. And I think that it should always be addressed if there's any updates. For me, the biggest thing I want to get out of this, Lisa, is regardless of who's overseeing committees, what is my goal when I'm going to the meeting as a liaison? So is it Mike has a couple of certain questions that I need to get answered, or a certain committee or certain department in town hall has questions that specifically my committee could answer, and I should be acquiring that information while I'm there? Is there, 3 points I should be bringing back from every meeting to bring to all of you? I can't imagine coming to a select board meeting every 2 weeks where there's not at least one bullet point from each committee. Like, to me, that's the part that was so mind-boggling because of the time that we're putting into it, like Sally's talking about. To come to that meeting and not have at least one bullet point per committee is crazy. But if we're giving those, that's an open time for Mike to be able to respond from the town hall perspective, if it's appropriate, and say, oh, that was what you guys discussed in the meeting. Yep, well, let's get together and talk about X, or, whatever. Or, yep, so you'll hear an update from Chris today. We actually are working with this at town hall, and that would align with your committee. I think just having more openness during that section of the meeting, maybe putting it more up the meeting so it's not at the end.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
Something like that. It's kind of around new business in my mind, and we're sort of rushing off the meeting around the time we do give our updates. You and I have talked about that. So, possibly that's an option, but I do agree with you, Sally, but I don't see it as a threat to have Mike overseeing, because I don't look at him overseeing as being in complete control, if that makes sense. And if that's what your concern is, that's just how I'm hearing it.
Thank you, Courtney. I think, you made some good points. And the other part that I think I like to remind myself when we're reporting during our committee comments is that we're not reporting just to each other, but we're reporting to the public. We're getting it out there in the public so that the public knows what these other committees are working on. And maybe they'll want to go listen to that committee meeting. Maybe they'll want to join the committee. Maybe they'll be encouraged that, hey, they are talking about LED lighting or composting or whatever it might be. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind when we're reporting what our committees are doing as liaisons, that we're keeping each other apprised, but we're also keeping the public apprised, which I think is really important. Phil. Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
one last thing, Lisa, and I agree with that. And, I think that when you just showed the screen of how many committee, openings there are on each committee, that's something that if Mike was in control, he doesn't have the budget to hire more people right now until next budget year, at least in my knowledge. So I agree with you, Sally, because I hear what people want and I'm like, well, let's just get someone in there. Let's hire, let's do this. But the reality is that doesn't just exist, right? So I think that if we are able to utilize our committees more, we should not have a vacancy. It should be a demand to want to be part of a committee. And I think that if people can see that the town is fully engaged in these committees and really invested, and that Mike is using his voice and showing his investment in the committees, people will feel confident joining and they will see movement forward. Something Bill mentioned earlier is people don't feel like they're getting enough done, or they don't feel their time is best spent if nothing's moving forward. If we're all on the same page, I do feel like things will move forward and it will give people the desire to join. And it should be something we're advertising. Are you interested in X, Y, and Z? Please come join us. Don't be behind your keyboard. Come out and be part of the conversation. And I think that if we do that and you're encouraging people to come and be part of it, we're going to have demand for committees, is how I feel like it should be. And that's just my opinion.
No, and I agree. And I think people seeing successes, that creates more, positive feedback, and that will hopefully create more engagement.
Basically an unpaid extension of each department in town hall is how I look at it. So, if Chris and Karen are really needing help, well, guess what? Mike knows where they're needing help. And if we're concerned that Chris and Karen are working X amount of hours in overtime each year and that we need to get them help, well, we have 6 committee members to call on to help them with the tasks that are mundane, maybe, or help them with things that, counting parking spaces in a parking lot, or, whatever, mapping LED lights. I don't know, just things that we could give members of these committees. Like you said, Sally, you're not just showing up there because you have nothing better to do. You're showing up because you've committed, and that's not just you, it's everybody. So if people are willing to show up there and not be in a paid position, then let's make it worth their while. Let's use them as almost extension employees of the town in essence, and get some stuff done.
I have Bill and Sally, and then I did want to quickly share what I did learn from other towns. And then I do see that John's got his hand up in the public. And so I thought we could go to him if that's agreeable to everybody.
I guess I want to get to discuss liaison. I know when I go to a meeting as a liaison, I consider myself a bridge. I am a bridge, so that if the committee is saying, geez, we really need this, and we're not getting any feedback from Mike, or we're not getting any feedback from the board, I take that and move the ball forward, help them move the ball forward. My job is not to involve myself or get in to the conversation inside the committee. That's their job. That's what they're there for. I'm not trying to become an extra committee member. I'm simply there to help them bridge with town staff or whatever they need. As for something you said something about using select board liaisons as opposed to staff liaisons. I don't think that's a wise idea. I think only because, and nothing against you, Lisa, but I think the staff liaisons help people accomplish certain things. I'm not an expert in town planning, and yet on the planning board we have a staff liaison. We have the town planner. That meeting would be going nowhere good if we didn't have the town planner there to help move that process along and understand the rules and the ropes of the road. There are meetings, I'm sure, like energy efficiency, where you need to have the engineering expertise of Chris. None of us have that expertise. We're here to be like the orchestra conductor. We help provide a bridge for information or resources to both back to our board for discussion, or to the town manager and staff if it's appropriate to go in that direction. That's where I see the role of liaison, and that's something that I think if we can help That way we go in with the idea of trying to help them be successful by trying to help bridge them with the resources that they need. That is the best, in my opinion, that's the best use for the liaison position. Thank you.
I've been told that the liaison position is what you make of it. I do think we need to define it a little better than that. I was a past member of the Energy Efficiency Committee, so I still consider myself a member of the committee, and I participate fully. But with the Committee on Aging, not so much. I try to remain in just a liaison, what I expect a liaison role to be. As far as staff liaisons, I think instead of requiring Karen and Chris to come to all these committee meetings, that maybe it becomes something where as the select board liaison, you say, hey, they're going to be talking about lighting, Chris. Maybe you can come to the next meeting, but you don't need to come to all the meetings. We just need you at this meeting. That's just my thoughts in that regard. But Sally, go ahead.
Okay. As far as the staff committee members, I just find that with the HPC is that if we didn't have Karen there, it would just be a disaster. So, I mean, she helps in so many ways, it just really wouldn't function at all. So I could not step into her role. Don't know, she's just amazing. So I think that certain committees, it's not a black and white, it's gray. They all have different needs, and some might really need that staff there. The West Kennebunk, not so much. They're not needed at all and they don't go. So that's perfect, but it's two different ones. And as far as, having all these blanks on empty spots on our committees, I think that it's another show of where we have not done, it's been hard for us to communicate. Because I think if the community knew and understood that there's committee spots open, that we would have more of these filled, and we need to get the word out. We need to communicate that. And I think that that's we've got that new person, Tina, and she's awesome. But just getting the word out is going to help with those spots. People don't understand how Kennebunk is run. And we have a small circle around the town hall that's very active, and you think, yeah, everybody knows, but the bigger circle outside doesn't have a clue. And that's where these are the people that we need to reach.
Yep, I fully agree. And I think that's where I mentioned briefly about having different structures. Maybe people don't want to commit to a full committee role, 3-year, commitment, but maybe a task force or a volunteer, Mike and I have discussed having just a volunteer list that we can call on people to help with certain things, and just maybe expanding access to how people can participate. Blake.
So the threshold question that we have been dancing around here is, why do we have committees? And I think that when we last visited this subject, we identified a dysfunctional relationship that you've alluded to, Lisa, that this tri-party relationship between the board, the staff, and committees, and that continues to be problematic.
Mm-hmm.
If you asked each one of those three groups why we have committees, I think you would get dramatically different answers. Having served on a committee, I can tell you that the reason that I was involved in a committee is that I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to work with people who shared similar interests and a similar desire to make a difference in the community. And the last thing that I wanted was to be sent on a fool's errand by the select board. And I think oftentimes many committee members feel that either they've been sent on a fool's errand or they have been given no direction at all from the board or anyone else. That, I think, is really what we need to fundamentally ask ourselves is, why do we have boards? What do we expect of them? What's the desired outcome of having boards in this town? And other than the ones that are required by law or charter. And in my view, we're leveraging expertise, we're leveraging experience, we're leveraging knowledge, training, education, and most of all, we're leveraging a willingness to volunteer, as Courtney was suggesting, using unpaid labor to help push the boulder down the road, which is what we're all trying to do. Ultimately, the committees should have the same goal as all of us, and that is to improve the quality of life of our residents. And that's, that's really what we should be focused on. But I'm not sure that we have answered that question tonight as a board. That's my concern.
Nope, that's where I was going to bring it around to, is, the fundamental question is, what is the role of the committees in Kennebunk? And essentially there's three choices. So what do we see that as? Because right now, the way the charter is written, and, I alluded to that with my, all my lead up, is right now, the select board's in charge of committees, in control of, to use the proper term. And so as a select board, right now, right here, at this moment in time, what do we see, because we are in control, as the role of committees? And, I think that's, that was essentially what this meeting was supposed to be. And I think that's maybe, we can't vote, we can't make decisions, but maybe we can come to a consensus.
Well, I'm not sure that in control means what we think it means.
Well,
and that's, I've had discussions with the town attorney. I've done some research on that, and it's not completely, it's not clear that in control means that we boss the committees. We have the power of appointment under the charter, and not to committees. The committees are not addressed in the charter, as you well know. Boards and commissions are, but committees were not addressed. And so, I think so we should all fill in the blank. We have committees because what's the outcome?
Can I say something to that?
Yeah.
I don't think we should say what, quote, the purpose of committees and commissions are in this town, because every single one of them has a different purpose. And some of them might fulfill the purpose of advancing specific items that are important to the town staff and this board, and others may have more of a role of providing information or resources or ideas or thoughts. And so I don't think it's a single, yes, we could probably come up with a mission statement, and maybe we should do that, to say that this is our fundamental belief about committees in the town of Kennebunk, and that's fine. But I think it's more relevant that every committee should have a purpose, not what is the purpose of all the committees, but every committee should have a purpose. And if that purpose, as you pointed out earlier, Lisa, is, you had this in your introduction. One of the things that makes them effective is have a well-defined mission statement and purpose, and a touchstone that they can go back to and say, are we following this? Or if they're not, then it's easy to point to that and say, this is the direction that we've agreed on. If we need to change it, fine. But that, I think, is the fundamental thing, is that every committee should have a purpose. Now, what is the purpose of all of them collectively?
Yeah, I disagree with that, Shiloh. I think we should have a philosophy that guides, why we establish a committee in the first place, what we expect of committees as they progress, what's the term that they should serve, whether it's a standing committee or an ad hoc committee or a task force. We've used that term. So I don't.
That's the purpose that I'm talking about.
I'm sorry, what?
So the purpose of the committee would encompass most of that, if not all of that. So if
I'm taking a higher view of this and saying, philosophically, what do we expect of committees? Why do we appoint them in the first place? Why did
I thought you were getting into things like the term and the type of the committee, which is
no, I'm not in. I could care less about that. I'm philosophically challenging the board to answer that question.
okay.
And I think what Blake is trying to say, the way I see it from the research that I've done, there's three things that, committees can do. They're either essentially task forces that fulfill tasks that the town designates to them. Or they are think tanks that create wonderful visions of, and hopefully that we can apply them in town. Or they're a combination of the two. And going into being on a committee, recognize that you are helping fulfill the vision of the town, but conversely, hopefully the town will fulfill your vision.
Okay, so then to follow up on that then, so Blake, in Lisa, in your mind, then is it a matter of coming up with this board philosophy for committees, a board philosophy for task forces, a board philosophy for commissions, and a board philosophy for work groups? I mean, that would be fine if that's what you're getting at, but those things all have different philosophies.
What we're talking about here, Shiloh, is not boards and commissions. Those are already,
I'm sorry, not boards and commissions, but committees
right,
and
we're
task
talking about
forces and
committees.
ad hoc committees and work groups and like all these different elements that are subtly different and have different time frames and different purposes and different aspects. I mean,
So why do we have
the
the
not going to have the
EDC?
same purpose as the energy efficiency committee?
So why did we start the Economic Development Committee to pick one of the committees that I've served on? I mean,
To
what
advance the
was
economic
the
development of Kennebunk.
I mean, so there you go. But philosophically, why did we decide that we wanted an Economic Development Committee? Is it that we expected them, to be a think tank? Did we expect them to perform labor on behalf of the staff? I mean, you and I've had this conversation many times.
I know, but I guess my point about this is that like Committee on Aging came together because some people in the community saw a need to support members of our community who are aging and their families and provide a central point to provide resources for those that they didn't necessarily see coming from town staff and government, or if it was there, they thought they could do it more efficiently or provide additional resources. And so that came together, and that was the purpose of that committee. And I think we could step back from that and say, okay, so committees are there to provide additional resources or additional help to members of the community that beyond what is provided by town staff. And you could say that and make some work crafting around that, and that's probably true. And that would be part of it. But then there's the task force on the transfer station. And then that was a specific thing that was a group of people that got together with a specific expertise, with a specific mission in a defined period of time, and then disbanded. And then there's the garden committee that has a mission to provide food for people in the town and to maintain community gardens. Like there's lots and lots of different roles. I mean, you could say they're here to help the town, but I don't know that really helps us.
So philosophically, then what you're saying is that we create committees to address a specific need. And maybe that's the way we organize our thinking around committees and say, we identify a need, economic development, food for people who are hungry, trees, the trees that need to be taken care of. I mean, it's pretty clear to me that we identify a need and then fill it through the use of a committee. And do you agree with that? I mean, you've been around at this.
Sure. Yes. I mean, yes, of course. And I, like I said in my earlier statement, I'm fine with that philosophical. I guess it's more about what we need to define what the problem is. And I think Lisa did a good job of that early on. I don't necessarily think, and maybe this is where we have a point of disagreement, but I don't necessarily think the problem is that that committees are being created without a need. I think the problem is there are a lot of needs, a lot of competing needs, and there are potentially more needs than there are resources to handle those needs in all at once. And so there is now a need to structure and organize and prioritize those needs in terms of looking at the bigger picture of what the resources we have are, including the members of the committee and the access to the town staff, and how do we manage the expectations from the town of what can be done the expectations from the committees within their roles of what they can do, and then how to prioritize and structure temporally, like over a period of time, what and when gets done and how. And that to me is more of a tactical than a strategic problem. If we think there's a strategic problem of committees are being created or lingering too long that don't need to be there, that's maybe a bigger picture thing. But it
So
seems like where a lot of the
all right.
points are is with the tactical operational side that needs to be handled. And we've
Okay.
talked about that as well. We're confusing the
Right,
two.
so we agree then that we are a needs-based, that committees are based on needs that we identify. Whether long-term, short-term, medium-term. I mean, we have created committees that have really failed because they weren't fulfilling a need. They were just made up because it felt good. Festival committee. The festival committee imploded because, of personality conflict,
Yeah.
but, there wasn't really a need for a festival committee, because we had other committees that were already doing that job. So that's my,
Okay. It doesn't seem like that's the position we're in now, though. Maybe that's something to be watching out for going forward.
well,
Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, we
but-
winnowed those out. Remember, I was the committee killer, you put me in as the liaison and I
Yeah, a lot of
did
committees
away
did die when you were the liaison. That's true.
Yeah, I was the committee killer of the downtown committee
Careful about that.
and the festival committee and the cable committee, and not intentionally, just by proximity.
Okay. Well, anyway, I mean, I monopolize this too much, but I definitely think it. I guess my bigger point is that I think their prioritization. Okay, before I go away, the other thing I wanted to make sure that we don't lose sight of is this idea that if we are going to be talking about this hybrid idea that we've been talking a lot about, what are the needs and how can the committees fill them and where can the resources come and how can they be helpful to the town. But the other side of it is when you mentioned it earlier, Blake, leveraging expertise and knowledge, and Lisa mentioned it earlier when she touched on this idea that there's innovation and ideas coming from committees. If we're talking about this newer structure, this slightly revised structure, and committees are working through Mike, and Mike says, these are the resources we have, this is not feasible, this is feasible, this is what we can do, all those things, which I think is fine. How do we ensure that those ideas and thoughts and innovation doesn't get shut down because we don't have resources to deal with it right now? How do we put those things in the pipeline and preserve those and make sure that we're aware of them? And we hear people from the community saying, we think these things are important, and if we have too many, I want to make sure we're not throwing a filter in that we're not going to hear those ideas. And
No,
so
I
that's
mean,
the other thing I want to lose.
Mike has a list of probably 150 projects that that the town staff is working on, many of which have emanated from committees. They've been good ideas that committees have come up with. I mean, the LED streetlight that started with the Energy Efficiency Committee. Actually, I think it started with Mike suggesting to the Energy Efficiency Committee that would be a good project for them to work on. Same with solar. So I think there's a master list, but the master list, is rarely seen in public, and that's probably an issue that we need to address. Because there are a lot of projects that we know we've identified, and you're right. There is the possibility that they get overlooked or forgotten in the press to get things done. Mike, you're hiding. I know you don't want to be assigned more work, but what's the latest update on number of projects?
I don't have an exact number, and no, it's not about being assigned more work. I want to make sure, I mean, we're all in this together for the betterment of our community. So assignment of work is not an issue.
Understood, but how many, we have a lot of projects.
We have an awful lot, and it's a fluid list. As you know, when we started out probably at the beginning of the fiscal year, we numbered 202 initiatives that were in queue to be done this year. And, some move into levels of priority. They go to the top and they move to the middle and back and forth. I can't tell you where we are right now. Our division directors meet every week and we talk about projects and how we need to help one another and support one another and what resources we need. I can say that the expertise that we have on our committees would be a huge value to us, as we think we can be a huge value to them. One of the things that Shiloh just mentioned, though, was about how do you recognize that ideas may come forward and they don't somehow get quashed in some fashion? I think as we enter the beginning of the fiscal year or beginning of the calendar year, that's where we can highlight initiatives that committees and staff have agreed upon to say to the board, these are, 2 or 3 initiatives within each committee that are our goals and objectives. You, the board, then are fully aware and should then expect reports about the progress in each of those initiatives and how we're advancing. We are responsible to you and the public, of course. And so we have an obligation to report that. So I think if we collectively agree on where we're headed early in the year, then we can identify what that progress is throughout the year with periodic updates, whether that's monthly or whatever that might be. That ensures that nothing's falling through the cracks. If a priority changes, then you and the committees are all very aware of that, and we collaborate on that.
Then,
I really-
before I go down, then, so where then is the other side of it coming from? From the board, from us as a board setting, having a responsibility to set strategic direction, set, we're talking about the comp plan and the strategic plan that we're working on in this planning process, and then making sure that we are being clear. It's our responsibility to be very clear to you and to committees and
Absolutely.
Board are and how those and then meshing those align. So I guess again, it's back to what Lisa was saying before. It's communication. But we also have to do our job. Like we can't sit there and the committee and Mike's are going to take care of it. I just want to say, be very clear that I don't think that we.
Absolutely. You folks are the boss. And so it says you have control over committees. And if you delegate oversight, not total, you don't give away control. I think that's a misnomer.
Yeah.
You're not giving that away. You're saying to me and staff, work with committees to advance initiatives, not giving away control. That should never be expected.
Yeah,
You're
that wasn't
elected.
what I meant, actually. It was more about not giving away responsibility. I think we have a responsibility that sometimes is one of the frustrations that's come from committees in the past, is that we haven't set direction, that we haven't set what the strategy for should be that is relevant to that committee. And so they go do something and we're like, oh, well, that wasn't what we wanted you to do. Well, you never told us. We need to be, and maybe not at an operational level, but certainly at a strategic level. I feel like I want to speak to the rest of the board. I feel like we can't lose sight of that if we say Mike is running crowd control or running direct oversight, direct oversight or direct management of committees that doesn't in any way preclude our role from.
And Shiloh, if I may, that's the whole point of having liaisons. So when you're a liaison to a committee, what are you doing? You're monitoring what's going on during the meeting. You're keeping track of the different objectives that the committees have as part of your role as a liaison. So in other words, you're not going to have an objective that starts to fall by the wayside or fall through the cracks, because at some point you're going to say, wait a minute, what about this? Or where are we going with this? That is a liaison is part of what you would be doing. But the other thing that I was going to stay away from the beginning, when I first raised my hand, right after Blake indicated that, as stated very accurately, that part of what we do, the reason why we have committees, is to address a specific need. But after we've committed the meetings, one of the big mistakes that we've made is we sort of half-handedly offer up to a committee what they should do as we create it, without having a very specific agenda for that committee or a specific goal for that committee. And then all of a sudden we wonder why they fail, or we wonder why they get disillusioned, or why the whole thing drifts apart. And this is going to be the beauty of having Mike in it. We're going to have to set this committee. Mike's going to hold our feet to the fire to make sure that when we create a committee, we give it a goal and objective, and we give it a mission statement, at least a mission statement, so that way, while Mike is shepherding it through the process, and we're monitoring it as liaisons, they're moving the pig through the python, and actually starting to achieve results.
I I like what Bill said, and I agree that I think that this is where the select board liaison position needs to step up, Shiloh, and you're the one keeping track of what your committee is interested in, what the community and the constituents are interested in, and you're bringing that to your committee reporting in each agenda. And then, Mike knows, and like we've said, Mike can follow up and he can prioritize staff-wise what's important. I think that that's, really important with that's making the liaison position more important and making that a priority for people who are on the select board, knowing that that's something that is required of them. And I think that, I know this has been a point that's been discussed, but maybe this is something we need to add to the agenda as well, is continuing business. Where do things stand? It's not always old business or new business, but things are continuing. And so where are we on certain things with committees or staff or projects, et cetera? I don't know. Are we on a time limit, Mike?
We have the public to.
You have the public. I was wondering if you might want to try to bring it in for about 8:30 with public comment somewhere in there. I'd give you a 2-hour window.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I'd planned on 90 minutes, but this is definitely something that needs to be discussed. And so why don't we bring John in and see what he has to say?
Thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. John Costin on Dane Street. So a lot of thoughts. I hope you'll bear with me. I promise to try to keep them of substance, and I hope that they're helpful. Just to begin with, Lisa, I think you really brought in a lot of information, facts. It's very helpful for the board there in taking up this very important, very substantial, and very weighty issue, and a lot of opinion. And I think that's perfectly okay. Good on you. Well, I agree with some, disagree with others, but I think what you really exposed there or brought forward was the importance of having a shared and well-articulated understanding of the role of committees. That was a central theme that you brought forward. It was really reinforced to me listening to the discussion on the board that we're pretty far from that. I think that we've been far from that for a very long time. And I think that lack of a shared and articulated understanding of the role of committees has, unfortunately been to the detriment of the town. I hope that you all take away the same as I have taken away from this discussion tonight, that this is not a one-night discussion and that you're quite far from having that shared and articulated understanding. And I would hope that there would be opportunity for the public, for committee members to join in, and that you see that this is like a pretty big job and not something to be done in one night or to be just endorsed on one or a few members' a vision, as much merit as it may have. So I'd like to share my view and give you the background of where that comes from. It's 25 years of involvement with the town. I'm going to ask to get some credits for my wife's involvement because, as I think you all know, we're a very close couple. We cooperate quite a bit. So between her years on the select board, engagement in committees through the town, serving as a youth services coordinator with a youth services commission overseeing her, my own time spent on the Economic Development Committee as chair of the 2008 Charter Commission and Budget Board. I have a certain view of this, and I call this some institutional memory stuff. If you wound back the clock to former versions of the charter, let's go back to 2008. the version of the charter that you're holding in front of you has been revised. If you went back to, say, 2008, and you held up the charter next to the organizational chart of the town, you would see, of course, your committees and commissions that are, required by law, by ordinance, but you would see also a much closer association of committees with the organizational chart of the town. So much as you have the planning board and the town planner, when there was a youth services coordinator, there was a youth services commission, Parks and Rec director, Parks and Rec committee, and it was not 100% overlay. I'm not going to make that strong of an argument of it, but there was closer to a support or advisory committee for the various functions of the town government. And the way that I saw that and see that functioning as its best is a kind of a two-way communication where those citizens around the paid staff both bring in information from the community and take information back out to the community. It's been my own experience. It's been, I've been told this many times by committee members is, people are always grabbed, hey, Mary, you're on the Parks and Rec committee. What's going on with blah, blah park? Hey, Larry, you're on the planning board, what's going on with this development, et cetera. There's this very, at its best, this very organic back and forth through the committees. That ties in with a bigger theme that I think is really, really important to bring forward. The understanding of the town government at the time of the 2008 Charter Commission, and one that I think this is really not just me talking, but is shared, and I could, if you wanted me to, I could go into more detail of substantiating this view, is that there was a very clear distinction between two functions of our town's government. One is a kind of policy, you could call it a political side, a policy side, and one is an administrative or executive side. The professional town staff should, can I pause for just a second to say, like, it feels really weird to me that there's now 3 members of the select board on this meeting while I'm talking.
What?
You're
Well, okay.
here, but you just don't see our picture.
Thank you, Sally. I felt like I was being abandoned mid-ship. So the understanding was that the role of the paid town administration is to administer and almost never to make policy. Had we thought that the town manager should be making policy, we would have advocated for a mayor system, which we considered and rejected. The understanding is that the town manager and the folks who work under them are there to implement broader policy, the goals and values of the community. Many of them don't live in the community. We've had town managers, several, who don't live in town, or not town residents, and their job is to run the town on broader policy, broader goals and values that are established through the political process, which is mostly the election of the select board, the people to whom the town manager reports. In fact, there's also been a lot in the history to keep that line very clear, that town staff reports to the town manager reports to the select board. The committee side is, I would call it, a soft policy side, where the goals and values of the community are brought to staffers through the committees and kind of goes back out to the community along with assistance. I think that aligning the committees under the town manager really undermines that. And it's a direction that I do think that the town has been moving in, again, to its detriment. There's a real important distinction between policy and administration. I think that a committee structure that allows more direct communication between the community and the staffers responsible for a particular administrative area is a much better system for achieving that. I do think that the board should be cautious about allowing committees to direct staffers. They shouldn't. They shouldn't. However, I think that they can give very strong and useful feedback to staffers about what they see as the needs of the community in that area based on their observation, their communications, and they can take the information from the staffers back out to the community. When I've seen our town government function at what I viewed as its best, of course, we're all going to have different views of that, but at its best function, that is what I observed. That you had engaged committees working closely with staffers, but not directing them. Working closely with them, advising them, and helping them, supporting them in their work. I think that's about all I have to say in articulating that view. I think it is a different view than the one that you put forward, Lisa, and that I heard other select board members articulating. You know, I think that you have two different visions there, and that the select board should be considering them and others. But that this is really a big lift to articulate this. This is not one meeting. This is not two meetings. This is almost charter level work, though I'm not advocating that it be incorporated into the charter. I'm agnostic on that. I don't know, but it's that level. And I can tell you, we spent 1.5 years working on the charter. And I would urge you to not take it lightly. I would urge you to consider it long and well with a lot of input before you do anything to implement it. And you all did listen to me for a long time, so thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
John.
you, John. Can you hear me, John?
I can.
Okay, I just put my headphones in because the kiddos are going to bed. So I just wanted to make sure everyone can hear me. Thank you very much for your input. I think that that's really important. And I think that the one thing that you said that resonated to me is that it might be charter level, you know, and I know you're agnostic, as you said, but it is an important conversation. And initially, when I first started this whole investigation, I was like, oh, we'll get it done. Let's just figure it out and move on. But it really, the deeper I dive, I'm finding out it's a really, there's an intrinsic issue that runs deep in that it's really important for many levels to get it figured out and do it correctly. So thank you for your thoughts. And it looks like Dan has something to say.
Hello, everyone. Dan
Hi,
Sayers
Dan.
Street. First thing, Lisa, tremendous job. Really good
you.
work. Very, very impressed, and equally impressed with the quality of the discussion by the board. I will echo, I think one of the things that I took away as the thrust of John's comments is that this is a big lift. There's more than a few simple actions to be taken here. And I'll try to be brief. The thing that I caution on is just make sure you know what problem you're solving before you implement a solution. And what I heard in the discussion of the committees, and I take it that the focus of the discussion is the binding committees, and the binding committees are not part of this discussion. So with that understanding in place, so among the problems, I heard 4 that kind of rose to the kind of top level. Some committees lack direction. Some committees lack momentum. And I think the best example of that is the Affordable Housing Committee that has no members. I think if you have no mass, it's very hard to have momentum. Some committees lack internal alignment. Some committees lacked external alignment. And by external alignment, I mean with the town staff and with the select board, possibly also with the community. Those are the 3 external relationships that they should have. So I think those are that's a start for what the 4 dimensions of the problem that you're trying to solve might be. And it, especially with John's comments in my ears, clarifying sort of the policy side from the administrative side, that it's the role of the policy side to look after the care and feeding of committees to a certain extent. That the committees have direction and have momentum. You can't supply their internal alignment, but you can support their external alignment. And where care and feeding don't suffice, there's often room for pruning, and at times euthanasia. And this is I think you alluded to it at the very beginning, Lisa, that committees have a way of perpetuating their existence, even if they don't perpetuate anything else. So Blake, your services as committee killer, I think, are a valuable public service indeed.
I agree.
So at any rate, that's all I had to say. That I think looking at the dimensions of the problem and thinking about the steps that will be required to solve that are what you need to do next, and it's going to be a longer project with more steps.
Thank you, Dan. I mentioned this term to Mike, and I don't know if anyone else has mentioned or has heard the term KonMari. It's a Japanese phrase that has to do with streamlining and simplifying. And so that's what I'm trying to do with our committee system to make it more effective.
Right. Maybe some committees just no longer spark joy.
Exactly. So you've heard it. Exactly. Thank you very much, Dan. All right. So where do we go from here? Sounds like we've got more to talk about. I think there are some things that we can do moving forward, as far as discussing maybe the existence of some committees, not that we are terminating them forever, or euthanizing them, as Dan said, but maybe we just kind of clear out the house and then hopefully reestablish with some better purpose. And the other thing I'd like to see us do is maybe as liaisons, or maybe Mike can help with this, is have each committee that is currently in existence that is functioning create a purpose statement or a mission statement so that we can move forward from there. I think that that's a good way to start. Anyone else have thoughts before we get together and talk about this again sometime soon?
I had a couple. I was going to suggest something along the lines that I think it's important internally for committees to look at what their mission is. And to your point about making that, but I also think it's important for this board to look at those same documents, or if they don't have them, to be thinking what that would look like. And I don't know if it makes sense to do one-to-one meetings with, or have the liaisons talk to the respective committees about that. Probably would be important to do that. Let them know what we're thinking about this, and Mike can do that. I don't know again how exactly this is going to come down, but that's an important intermediate step for sure. Because regardless of what outcome and what structure and what administrative way we handle this going forward, I think that is a clear need, and should be probably every year. I was thinking a little bit more about the what Mike had said, and I actually don't know that what Mike had said and what John had said were that far apart. Maybe I'm just misreading it, but if you think about the there's administration, and then there's strategic thinking and policy. And if we had a situation where we as a board we're just abundantly clear, way more clear than we are now, about all of the different elements of the priorities and the strategy for how we're moving forward with any of these different things that we think are important in the town of Kennebunk, and we could lay that out, and we had a clear idea of what needed to be done, that would still need to be administered. And so even if all of our committees were clicking along and working and on fire and doing what, and they would still need to have some sort of point of contact in administration. And so obviously Mike does that now when there's a request or need from a committee to a staff member. That staff member reports to Mike ultimately, and there still needs to be that communication. So no matter what structure we have, Mike has to still be managing his people, and those people are going to be connecting with committees, and we need to be setting policy. So it comes down to how do those committees administered? It's not about the town manager setting policy for the committees. It's about how are the projects administered. And I really think the key element here is what Mike had referred to earlier, which is to say, maybe once at the beginning of the year, but probably more often than that, maybe twice a year at least, there would have to be a full evaluation, maybe a series of meetings with this board, that we look at the priorities for the year, and there's a clear articulation about how those projects are going to be accomplished. This is all town staff, Parks and Rec are doing this. This is one that's going to be handled partially by committees. This is the 3 goals we have for the year. Whatever that looks like, report to us, and then that gets administered and managed throughout the year with information back to us. I don't think it's a matter of us saying Mike sets policy for the committees. That's not at all what we're talking about. We shouldn't be talking about that. I don't think anybody really has, but I think we need to be clear about that. Anyway, that's my takeaway from tonight. And at least if you see your suggestion that if we all go back and look at our respective committees and their mission statements, if they have them, we're thinking about what their mission statements could be if they don't have them, and talking to our committees about doing that internally as well. I think that's a good step, immediate step, and then trying to schedule another one of these with maybe some specific goals to try to advance during that session.
I agree, Shiloh. If any of you or anybody wants to take a look at the document Kathy created, it has each committee and it has their purpose statement. And she went through and spent a lot of time with me and spent a lot of time on her own creating that document. And it really is a great reference. Thank you so much, Kathy. She was here, but she's still here. Yay. Thank you, Kathy.
Can you forward that?
What's that, Bill?
Can you forward that to us?
Yeah, I can send it out to everybody. It is linked in the agenda, but I will send an email out to everybody. But that is just a straightforward, you don't have to search for it. It lists what every committee's purpose or mission is. And I think that that's a good place to start. And then as liaisons, we go to each committee and say, hey, let's work on this. Actually, the Energy Efficiency Committee was working on that last spring. And they got caught up with the LED lighting project. And so hopefully we can go back and look at that. And it looks like we have 1 minute, but I think that's a really good first step, is for us to talk about mission statements for committees. And Bill, you want to take us home?
No, I was going to comment on something that Shiloh said regarding Mike's role, and I agree with Shiloh that Mike isn't creating policy in terms of what the committee is trying to do. Mike is helping shepherd the process forward.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that that's clear. So I think some of the other comments suggested otherwise. So I want to make sure that's.
I think that that's a really succinct way to put it, that it's just, he's the point person, because I think that that's where things are getting caught up, is that everyone's wandering around and there's nobody in charge. And I think that that's really important to have that point person that we all know to go to, who has all the information and can facilitate communication. So thank you, Bill. We'll end with that. Anyone else? It's exactly 8:30. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, committee members and public members and select board members, and Mike, thank you.
Thank you.
And so I think we've got a plan. So I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thanks for getting this process rolling, Lisa. This is a great start.
You're welcome, Shiloh. Thank you very much for your feedback. That's really good to hear. And thank you, everyone else, for your
Good effort,
feedback.
Thanks, Lisa. Very good.
Thank you.